I want to tell you that, well, I'll say it like this. Several weeks ago, I mentioned this in this verse in a passage, and I want to look at it again. I want to get the very sense of the importance of what I'm going to talk on today. This takes place after Jesus had died on the cross. He had risen from the dead, and he had walked in the earth for that time. And he rose into heaven, and an angel shows up and says, go wait and go to Jerusalem. Hang out in Jerusalem. Wait there, and then something's going to happen, basically. Okay? So they all go to Jerusalem, and they're there for some time. And what do? What do you do in Jerusalem, right? You're waiting for not exactly sure what. And you've got all of your believers together, this group of believers together. So what do? And they prayed. We know they prayed. But the one big thing they did beside pray, the one thing is this. Let's go ahead and look at it, Mike. Acts 1:20, for it is written in the book of Psalms, Peter stands up and he says this, and he talks about an old prophecy. And he said, his written book in the Psalms, let his dwelling place be desolate, and let no one live in it, and let another take his office. And I put the reference in there. Those are my parentheses. And what it's speaking of, or who it's speaking of, is Judas. Okay? It's speaking of Judas, who betrays Jesus. And he was one of the 12, and when he lost his place as one of the 12, and they had to replace him. And that's what they decided to do at this time. Of all the things they could do when they were waiting in Jerusalem, replacing Judas was the one thing they did. It must be important. Are you with me? It must have been an important thing to do, not just a random thing. By the way, can we open the doors in the back maybe? Kathy? Can you hear me back? Oh, there we go. All right, thanks, Jason. We'll get the air flowing a little bit. Is it warm in here? If I see you nodding off, if you're watching online and you're nodding off, you have a different challenge. I'm having a good time. All right, so government was an important thing, and it got me to thinking about our government, the government of the United States of America. Nobody in this room was there to form it, but we all see how it's formed. So we weren't around back then to form it, but we all see the shape of it, and I appreciate some of the things that our government did. For example, I appreciate that our government has checks and balances. That it's not about any one person or any group of people becoming too strong. That there's a change and there's checks and balances. And it's something that our government does. I appreciate that our government has some fundamental rules around it, the Constitution, some fundamental guidelines to work around. I think that's a good thing. You with me? There are some things in our government that we have that we really like. We have the right, because of our Constitution, to disagree. We can say it publicly. We can go outside if we chose to do this, and we can put a soapbox down. We can stand on our soapbox and talk about how much we disagree with that person or that person or that person, or their policies, their policy, their policy. We can do that here. This is a good thing. So the Founding Fathers, when they started this government years ago, they gave us a government that allows us as people to be involved. But while that's happening, our government also shapes us. You with me? Our government is in place, and we vote and we choose who's there through our voting, but it also influences us. It's not just a collection of people that sign off on letters, but it's how they do what they do that influences how we are. For example, this is an easy example, but our road system. We have roads. Our government built roads. The roads across America weren't built by a private party. It was built by the federally supported government, or the state government, or the city government. But it also influences us as people. The policies and the programs they put in place, they influence who we are. Every day, our government influences us. Other countries don't have that. Some countries have a very authoritarian government. They have one person in charge, and that's just the way it is. If they don't like what the one person does, tough luck. They can't even complain about it without going to jail. And that government influences those citizens in that way. Keep your mouth shut. Right? It's not just national governments, though, but think about this. Think about the corporations and how their government is set up. So Cody Zetting is back from the Marines. The military for example, government is very authoritarian. There's somebody in charge at the top, the general, who tells the colonel what to do, who tells the major what to do, who tells the captain what to do, who tells the lieutenant, so on and so on and so on, and all the way down till it gets to brand new Marine Cody. And you think Cody would ever disagree? Sorry. Just pass it back up to the general that he's wrong. No, the brand new Marine would never disagree because their government's not set up like that. Their structure isn't set up like that. But what about this? What about a fast food chain and how they're set up? I promise there's relevance to this. Hang in with me here. A fast food chain is set up in a way that there's an overarching, let's use Subway for example. And I'm not being paid for this solicitation. So there is a corporate Subway, right? And they make rules in the corporate Subway. And if we wanted to, we could go together and we could buy our own Subway franchise. And we could put our Subway franchise right here if we wanted to in the back of the building. Or we could put it on a different side of town. We could go to the east side, to downtown. We could put it anywhere we wanted to. And Subway would give us the freedom to manage our store, to own our Subway location any way we wanted to do it. Within reason. They want us to advertise Subway. They want us to be clean and these sorts of things. But we could hire the people we wanted to hire. We could promote the people we wanted to promote. We could do anything we wanted to. So the government of Subway, the leadership in Subway would allow us that liberty. But you can't put that liberty into the military, can you? And the leadership process creates a certain kind of employee or a certain kind of citizen in the case of our governments. Are you with me so far? It's important to have that foundation in place before we move on. The government shapes the citizens. This is a really big piece. A lot of times we think that citizens can shape the government, but it also shapes us too. We work in it. How many of you have ever worked for an authoritarian boss? Their way or the highway? You know what I'm talking about? Do we like it? And it shapes a certain kind of employee, doesn't it? So have you ever worked for a boss that can't make a decision to save their life? That's a different kind of issue. You know, the boss says, hey, let me tell you, well, I don't know what to do. I should tell you what to do, but I don't know what to do. I don't know. So here we have, in the Old Testament, one type of religious structure. Priests, Levites. Priests and Levites, by the way, priests were Levites, but Levites were naturally priests. It wasn't synonymous. They would have temple duties. They would have religious duties in that structure. And they would do things on behalf of the people with whatever their assignments were. The Levites would do a lot of the logistical work. They would put up tents, and they would move things and clean things, and they would do a lot of that. Priests were more directly involved with things like sacrifices, speaking to the people. The high priest going before the ark, or going into the Holy of Holies. So they had very specific things that they would do. It was very authoritarian in a lot of ways. It was very much, we will do this, or legalistic. This will occur with this, will occur with this. And that really informed the citizens, the people in the area. That's how they did things. But then there was a prophecy. And let's look at the prophecy. It's talking about Jesus. And we know this first part. For a child is born to us, a son is given. There are Christmas songs that have that line in it. The government will rest on his shoulders. The government will rest on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Jesus got the government. And if we know from Ephesians 1, there's actually a connection. He gets liberty. Jesus Christ gets liberty to shape the new covenant, the New Testament government. And he does it differently than the Old Testament. There's a change. It's not all authoritarian. It's not all legalistic. There's a shift to it. And there's a passage that kind of points to this. There's actually a lot of passages, but the one I'm going to use, let's go ahead and look at it. This is Ephesians 4. He who descended, who descended? Jesus. is also the one who ascended far above the heavens that he might fill all things. Don't you think it stands to reason if the government lands on Jesus' shoulder, Jesus is going to do what he wants to put the government in place? Isn't that reasonable? If the government's up to Jesus, he's going to put the government he wants in place. And he gave himself to, and he gave some, and he himself, there we go, he himself gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry. So we've got these roles now. These are very different kind of roles than priests and Levites. And they do very different things. There is a theme to all of them. It's for the equipping of others. There's a theme to that. It's for the equipping side. And we'll read on here. For the equipping of saints for the work of ministry and the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro, carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by the cunning, craftiness, and deceit. I lost the last word. Deceitful plotting. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things. So you can finish the rest here. We have those offices. We have offices that Jesus actually put in place. For what? For us to be equipped. It's not a legalistic structure now. We're looking at a structure that pours into us as people. And we've got these different roles that do different things. You know, when I think of apostle, my cheat sheet thumbnail for the definition of an apostle, this is my, If I've got a thumbnail definition of apostle, the one I really like is a pastor to pastors. Now, it's not exactly it, but I like that. My dad is my pastor. I'm a pastor. So guess how I view him? Right? Is that oversight? And kind of in that apostolic way. I view him a lot like that. Most denominations have some type of oversight for pastors. You with me on that? They use different descriptions. You know, district presbyter, whatever. There's different things, but the point is, it's investing in leadership. For the sake of time, it's investing in leadership. Then we look at the prophets, somebody who really focuses on equipping others in some of the outward manifestations. Then we look at evangelists, somebody who equips others in terms of reaching others for the Lord, but it's an equipping to reach others. And then there's a pastor, somebody who looks out, who cares for, who shepherds while raising up, who equips others to do that as well. Imagine that, a shepherd equipping others to shepherd. Can you believe that? I'm biased to that one, by the way. That's me. So if you're around with me at all, guess what I want to equip you to do? Shepherd. Look out for each other. That's kind of in my heart. So we've got this new process, this new government that Jesus puts in place. And it shapes us differently than what the Israelites had back then. Can you see it? In this new system, it's about investing in people so they can go do the work. In the old system, it was bring your lamb here, bring your goat here, do this here, and they'll all take care of it for you. In the new system, it's about us going. I think there was some term, I don't know when it happened. There's a term that was used, and I think it's done a disservice to all of us and really the body. And the term is the word ministry. Because when we hear it, it's really easy for us to think in terms of what we do in church. What do we do on a Sunday morning when we come together? But in reality, the New Covenant ministry, it's everywhere we go. It's our job. It's our neighbors. It's everything that we do. Our ministry is everything that we do unto the Lord. It's not just, for me to be called a minister is a little silly because we're all ministers. I'm a pastor minister. Some of you are professional ministers. In other words, you go to work and you do that there. Some of you are connected, you have a ministry or work here in the congregation. Hopefully we all are involved here. But we're all ministers. So now I want to change gears for a minute. In several weeks, we're going to have an ordination coming. Phil McCabe, and I've announced this now, Phil McCabe, we're going to ordain an elder, and Mark Holdman, we're going to ordain as a pastor. It's a celebration for us. These are good men. And there are more ministries. I didn't talk about elder at all, and I didn't talk about deacon, and that is certainly is part of the process that the Lord has put in place in the new covenant. But I'm excited for these guys, and I'm excited for us as a church. And I wanted to use this morning to talk a little bit about the new covenant structure for government. So I've set that base. Let's look at the next slide, Mike. But now what about the elders? What about an elder? So the column on your left, it's funny, through habit I want to say, my right, your left, or whatever. But I'm looking at it in the back, on a screen in the back. I know it's on your left. It's throwing me off, though. The column on your left represents the biblical requirements for the office of an elder, or the role of an elder. We found them in 1 Timothy. They're also in Titus. And I'll just cruise through them here real quickly. One wife. Must be a one-woman man. Very important. Phil McCabe is a one-woman man. By the way, I want to say this. In the Milwaukee Journal, there was a report of a large local church who's gone through, just this week, they've gone through a terrible thing, terrible issue with their senior leader. And it's just very sad. These leaders, they're people too. Amen? And when things happen, it's sad for that family, for his family. It's sad for the congregation. It's sad for the impact. As people read the news, people who don't know the Lord, they read the news and they think, oh, what's happening over there now? There's a bad testimony aspect to it, and that's sad. So I pray if you Milwaukeeans, us in the room, we need to pray for this congregation, this community as a whole, and for the leaders in it. We pray for our leaders wherever they are. Above reproach. This doesn't mean perfect, but we can all see that they're trying to head that way. Sober-minded. It's okay to laugh. It is okay to laugh, but when it's time to get to business, we get to business. That's what this is saying. Self-controlled, able to instruct. I know a lot of people that like to tell other people what to do. You know those kind? Able to instruct all the time. They'll tell you, but they don't like to rebuke. Or I know a lot of people who like to tell everybody what they're doing wrong. Do you know those kind of people? You're doing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. But rebuke, this is in love. Not a drunkard, not addicted, not violent, manage his own house well. The Bible says if you can't manage your own house well, how can you manage a house? This congregational family. Must not be a new believer. The point to this is sometimes new believers become elders quickly, and then it goes to their head. Pooh. I'm an elder. I will tell you, being an elder is hard work. Most of it is not seen work. So if somebody aspires to do the work of an elder, most of their work is going to be behind closed doors. Not secretive, but it's just not seen. A lot of our output as elders is not seen. A lot of the discussions we have, it's not widely known. We can see the work generally, but it's hard. And we have to make decisions sometimes. For this house, how we operate is we make decisions sometimes that are scary decisions. When we bought this building, it was a significant decision for us. When we did other things in our congregation, they were scary decisions. Is this right? Is this really right? It can be hard to make decisions that we're really stepping out on. Sometimes there's a crisis that happens in a church, and it's a difficult time to be an elder in that because you're trying to deal with things yourself and understand it yourself, but at the same time you've got to try and lead through that. So being an elder is not, I tell you, it's not easy. It must be well thought of by others. This does not mean unanimously. I've never found anybody unanimously loved. But this means well thought of generally in that way. Add-ons. Now, add-ons is not in the Bible. That's my word. And that's a way of saying there are other things at Grace that we look forward before somebody's an elder. We look to make sure they're here regularly. Could you imagine if we had an elder here? Now remember, the government shapes the people too. Could you imagine the influence if we had an elder that didn't come here very often? Could you imagine that? What about this? I don't want somebody who's just argumentative. Some people are just contrarians. Could you imagine if we had an elder that was always politicking? How would that shape us? If somebody who's always politicking, well, I'll tell you what we should do. Well, I'll tell you what we should do. That would be awful. Would anybody want to deal with that? Probably not. I want to like the elder. Don't you want to like the elder? I mean, just like them. I want to enjoy their company. Don't you? If somebody's representing us and they're in a room, we want to think that they like us. We look for that. I look for somebody that's got a backbone. They got to be able to stand up and say no. That's important for an elder to do. So on the right, there's 3 underlying goals. Those are the accountabilities of an elder at Grace Christian Fellowship. 3 things. Shepherding, to help the pastor shepherd. To govern, to help the pastor govern. And third, to look after the soul of the pastor, both for concern. I want them to look out for me, be concerned for me. And due to the pastoral accountability to elders. So what I mean by this is, if I'm accountable to that elder, I really want to like them. And I want them to like me. I want them to care about me as a human being. And I want to care about them because we're going to have a unique relationship together. I believe Phil meets these requirements. More importantly, though, this is really what we look for from our elders. There's another slide. Let's look at the next one, Mike. What about pastor? They have all the same qualifications of elder. They do. They must demonstrate the gift of being a pastor. We wait for that. We wait for them to prove it first. Are they equipping others? Are they the kind of person that when they get involved in someone's life, it advances that somebody? It's not one person I'm talking about, but everywhere they seem to go. Now, Mark has been doing this for years. Mark is the kind of guy, any ministry that he gets involved in, people in that ministry all of a sudden kind of go to this whole new stratosphere of getting stuff done. He equips them just naturally. It just kind of oozes out of him. He doesn't think about it at all. And that's a very pastoral kind of gift, Ephesians 4:11, for equipping of others. And add-ons, again, we want to get along. We want to make sure they have a good reputation. We want to make sure they understand the inner workings of our church. Could you imagine if we had a pastor that didn't understand how we worked? Wouldn't that be horrible? It really would. They've got to know how we work. They've got to know my heart. I've got to know their heart, and you should know them too. We would never want to put an elder in that we're just like, well, I don't know, do we know this person? It would be a mess. Or a pastor. So here's what we require from a pastor. This is different from an elder. We certainly require those 3 goals that elders have to walk in. They do preach. They don't have to preach a lot, but they do preach once or twice a year. Mark will preach. Mark is preaching once or twice a year. And that's, by the way, all of our pastors, except for me, and elders are bivocational. We don't say that as a shameful thing. We say that we actually celebrate that because they carry that ministry into the workplace. And then they come here on the weekends and they plow through and they minister to us. That's why we don't ask them to speak too much. But when they speak, they're prayed up and they're ready for it. We ask them to equip others. This is very, very important. If a pastor doesn't equip others, then what are they doing? They're just a public speaker. The final one, annual goals. Here's what this means. The pastors here and the evangelists here have annual goals. All of us do. I share my annual goals every January. Over the pulpit, I share them in a message. The other pastors and the evangelist need to write a goal every year. It has to be different every year. And they do it. Usually it's not as public, but they have to get their goal done. We put a lot of stock in this. So much stock. If a pastor or an evangelist would not complete their goals 2 times in the course of ministry, so let's say this year and then in 5 years, it doesn't have to be back-to-back years, 2 times, they voluntarily resign their position. I don't ask them to resign. That's their way of saying, I'm tapping out. We put a lot of stock in that. If you're ever curious about the other goals, just ask them. Ask the pastors here, ask the evangelists here. So what's your goal this year? What are you doing? That's okay to do that. Really put a lot of pressure on them. Say, ooh, that's really weak. Do more. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. We have a great group of elders. We have a great group of deacons. We really do. We have our body ministry leadership. Really good, super faithful. And we believe very much in this new covenant, the New Testament perspective on governing and how it equips people to go do. We do it with accountability. We do it with excellence. We really believe this. And again, could you imagine if we had somebody as an elder or a pastor, anybody as an elder or pastor, that wouldn't even have a ministry here? No, they've got to prove it. Be faithful. Hey, that's pretty good preaching. I love this congregation. And I just can't imagine anybody in any of these roles that Jesus himself has called out. In this fivefold, or elders and deacons, I can't imagine anybody not being part of us first. Not understanding us. Could you imagine? This is just, I know I'm just having fun here for a minute. Well, let me say this. I do love this congregation. And I love who God has brought in, and I love the work that he's doing here. So with that, Jason, could you imagine, now that we're offline, if somebody from New York flew in and said, I'm going to be a pastor in your place?